Deborah Brown. About 3 years ago, in 2010, the college, Montgomery College, sponsored a trip to Senegal. And we had about, I guess, 18 or 19 students, of whom Ms. Brown was one. And we visited various parts of Dakar and around Senegal. And Ms. Brown was, we went to the island of Gore, which is the site of, was the United Nations cultural site, and it's the site of an old slave fort. It's a very impressive place. It's impossible to forget the experience. But Ms. Brown, while we were there, it so happened that there were a group of Japanese journalists from Japanese television. Maybe if we have time later, we will. We have a video clip that she can show you, but she was interviewed on national Japanese television, giving her experiences and talking about what it meant. So Ms. Brown, can you just come down briefly, and then she'll talk about some of the work that she's done. So this is an example of African and African-American connections, of which there are many. So, you know, you're going to hear all these stories about how Africans and African-Americans don't get along with each other and don't understand each other and all that. And some of it is partly based on, you know, fact, but a lot of it is just talk. So, you know, I think we need to recognize that. But first of all, let me just introduce Ms. Brown, Ms. Deborah Brown, and she's going to speak to you for about 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you?
Great.
Good. My name is Deborah, but I prefer to be called Dee, and Dee is my professional name, and I came up with that name many years ago because I wanted an African name, but could never figure out what I should be called. And then when I discovered one, and somebody called me that, I didn't know who they were talking about. So I did more research and came up with the name Dee, which is a combination of Yoruba and African name. Dee means educator, teacher, healer, and that is me. When I was first approached by the college to go to Africa, of course I leaped for joy because it had been my dream ever since I was a little girl to go to Africa and see what that really felt like, tasted like, looked like, and see the roots of my great-great-grandmother, because my grandmothers were of Indian and African descent, and they had all these traditions that they had passed down to me that I personally had no clue where they came from. So when I put my foot or feet on the soils of Africa, I immediately felt at home. I felt this was my birthplace. And people were telling me, welcome back home, Mama Africa. So that made me feel so wonderful. I don't know why they call me Mama Africa, but they did. But anyway, going with the college was a one-of-a-kind deal for me. I had wonderful professors. There were a lot of students. And each one of us had particular assignments that we were given to do when we got to Africa. My area was health education, since I was a health ed student. But my passion was holistic and natural health. So I went as sort of like the resident health person to the group. And what I decided to do was to put together a medical kit to sufficiently address the group if any issues came up. And the way I put the kit together, I put it together from the CDC, everything that America required for a traveler, but I also put the kit together according to holistic and natural principles. So when I went to Africa, I had this extra suitcase that everybody kept, well, what is that she keep rolling around? Where does she keep rolling around this suitcase? So in the suitcase, it was medical supplies in case anything had, you know, come up with any of the travel. And I was also trained as a first responder. So my job as a student and as a traveler, I'm like, okay, how can I put all these concepts together to serve my group, of course, get a grade, and enjoy Africa at the same time? And then when I got to Africa, I had to pull some of the resources from Africa out of their medical and holistic community to incorporate what I believe to enrich the spirit, not only physically, mentally, socially, and whatever else came up with trauma. And let me give you an example. A couple of people got sick, you know, from the food. So instead of me giving them always what the CDC requires of a traveler, I tried to go to the holistic realm first and address that first. And then we went up the ladder. And then I also said, well, let's see what people in Africa do when they get sick. So I had to incorporate a lot of principles. Now, to Gorée Island. When we went to Gorée Island, I was thoroughly shocked because I had heard about the slave ships and stuff, and I had seen the slave ships in America. But when I went to Goree, it really, really, really hit home more so than what I saw in America at museums and the actual slave ship. On Goree Island was one of the islands where they held people captives before they sent them out to the various locations. So we had a guide, and then what happened was the Japanese people decided to come, and they wanted to do a film on African Americans returning to their roots, and they wanted to film us at actual Goree Islands, our experience. So when I first saw the holding places where they kept the men, they kept the women, and the children, it broke my heart. So I don't know if y'all heard of the door of no return. When you actually get to that door, you actually feel like you're living part of history. You look out in the water, and only thing you see is the slave ship, the ship way out there. Can you imagine being pushed or pulled over the rocks and taken somewhere from your family and loved ones and have no clue where you're going? More or less being on a ship, chained to hundreds and hundreds of people like an animal. So standing at that door, just the experience of it just really overwhelmed me. And going into the actual areas where they had the little children held by shackles. And, I mean, you still could see the blood, and you still could see the scratches where people were trying to scratch their way out. They had just a little window of sunlight every day. I said, no humans deserve to be treated that way. I don't care what side of the planet they come from. But it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, despite, you know, learning about the roots of our people. The food was good. The people was wonderful. And talking to the Japanese people was definitely an experience for me, because some of them didn't know good English, and of course I didn't know great Japanese, but we were able to communicate to get that project done. So I'm very proud of that project. So if anybody go to Japan and happen to see an African-American woman face on it, that's me telling them to send me my money. They didn't send me the money, you know. But anyway, we did film that. And there was a couple other people that went with me. Just walking on that soil is wonderful. Out of this trip from Africa, I decided to be bold enough and go back by myself. So I took a second trip, went by myself. First time I ever been out of country by myself. And this time around, I got to see the real Africa. Walk on the sand every day, eat with people. Didn't know the language, trying to communicate. Sometimes it was fearful, but before I went, I was very, very well prepared. I had talked to my professors and a lot of people, did conferences before I left. I had my itinerary prepared and everything. So anytime you go on an international trip, you must be prepared. Two other things I want to say, and I'm going to sit down, is that when you also going on an international trip, you want to do as much studying as you possibly can. You want to learn the language, you want to learn the people, spend some time with people before you go. The best thing that you can learn is that people are people. No matter how they came upon this planet, we are all connected to one another. And what came out of these two visits for me, I put together a project, called The Call to Africa. And it is, I have a film on that, Call to Africa. And also what came out, we decided to do a water project and build a well for some of the villages in Africa. We also have film on that. So now I go around and speaking to people about the Call to Africa, what it takes to get ready for an international trip, who to contact, and a couple of other little presentations that I do. And also what came out of that was a piece that I'm doing on black men and African American men in America. What does it mean to grow up black and young in America? So thank you so very much. Oh, I'm sorry. I do have a table set up in the back. And the table is kind of like coming from some of the areas that they're talking about up into the present. You can see some things that we as African Americans have accomplished. And if you're a young student, you may see some things that you didn't even know exist, like albums and 45s and stuff like that. So our people as a culture has contributed a lot on this planet. So we should be very proud of ourselves. Thank you.
Slideshow, sort of a historical overview, and then I'm going to take you to 3 websites to introduce you to the idea of black studies. We don't have any black studies courses per se here at the college, but many schools do. They have degrees, in fact. Sometimes they're called black studies. Sometimes they're called Pan-African studies. Sometimes they're called Africana studies. But they all have in common the fact that they link up these experiences from the Caribbean, from the continent, from Europe, and from the United States. So I'm just going to sort of give you a little bit brief view of the origins of Pan-Africanism. The first slide we have here is Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was actually born in the Caribbean, but he lived in Sierra Leone and Liberia in the 19th century. And many writers say that he's really the father of Pan-Africanism. He was one of the first writers to really talk about people of African descent working together, coming together, finding common shared experiences. Edward Wilmot Blyden, I think was born, he lived a long life. He was born, I think, around 1810 or 1802 or something, and he lived until about 1900. He also, although he was a practicing Christian, had a lot of respect for Islam and believed that Islam fulfilled a lot of the needs of African people. This is Alexander Crummell, who was born in the United States, actually in New York City. He was an Episcopal minister, also a Pan-Africanist, a believer in the idea that African Americans and Africans should work together. He had some ideas which maybe are a little antiquated today. He wanted black Americans to be Christian missionaries, in Africa. But at that time, that seemed like a reasonable thing to many people. But it didn't really catch on. But he's certainly one of the early Pan-Africanists. This is Henry Sylvester Williams, and I think maybe Dr. Lagoke will talk about him too. Henry Sylvester Williams, I think, was a Jamaican, one of the first organizers of the first Pan-African Conference, which was held in London in 1900. And he also participated in later Pan-African conferences. This is W.B. Du Bois, who many of you probably heard of, black American, also an advocate of Pan-Africanism and one of the organizers of the Pan-Africanist Conference. Du Bois, at the end of his life, really decided that, his politics were kind of radical, I guess you could say, and he is buried in Ghana. His tomb is near Accra in Ghana today. That's where he spent the last years of his life. This is the Pan-African Conference of 1919. Here's Du Bois right here. I forgot who all these other gentlemen were. But this was organized in Paris at the end of the Paris Conference of the Versailles Conference of 1919. So you had a group of about 60 people, mostly from North America and the Caribbean, a few from Africa. One of the people who really helped to fund and organize this conference was a Senegalese named Blaise Diagne. Actually, this is the 1921 conference. But one of the people who organized this conference was Blaise Diagne. He's a very interesting guy. In those days, actually, Senegal had 4 political subdivisions, and they actually elected deputies to the French National Assembly in Paris. Most of them were white, but Blaise Diagne became the first black African to sit in the French Chambre des Députés, as it was called, the Chamber of Deputies. He was a very highly educated man, but very proud of his French culture. He was proud to be a black man, but he was also proud of his French culture and his language. And so when Du Bois wanted to criticize the French government for its lack of self-government in Africa, Diagne really was in disagreement with that. So Diagne really wanted to, make sure the conference really was very pro-French, and Du Bois wanted to really criticize the French a lot. So there were always differences early on between many of the people in the Pan-Africanist movement. This is, of course, probably the most well-known of all the Pan-Africanists, and that was Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who was a Jamaican who migrated to New York City, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Garvey was a very charismatic figure, a very dramatic figure, and his movement eventually did not succeed. But it was less due to the weaknesses within Garvey himself, although there were weaknesses within him and his movement, than it was to the federal government. There was a new federal government agency in the 1920s called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And there was a young man who headed the Federal Bureau of Investigation named J. Edgar Hoover. And J. Edgar Hoover basically made up his mind that he was going to destroy Marcus Garvey, and he did. And so basically, Garvey was arrested on what were essentially trumped-up charges. I won't go into all the legality of all this, but there were charges which today would not stick in court. But he was convicted and sentenced to federal penitentiary, and then let out after a couple of years and deported to Jamaica, and his movement really collapsed as a movement. However, there are lots of people today who regard him as a great Pan-Africanist hero, and who regard him, a lot, you have to, when I come to the end of this, and you see what Pan-Africanism has become today, it's a really powerful movement. And we have people like Marcus Garvey to thank. Yes?
Dr. Smith, I just wanted to add, you may have heard recently, there was a commemoration of Rosa Parks' 100th birthday recently, and it was revealed on Democracy Now! That her father was a Garvey addict.
Really?
So a lot of her influence came from that line of thinking.
Garvey, see, you can always judge whether a movement succeeds or fails. Often the ideas have impacts and ripples long after the originator has passed away. And so Garvey influenced tons of people, not only in the United States, but in the Caribbean, in West Africa, in South Africa, mountain black people around the world. Moving on, now I wanted to kind of show you where Pan-Africanism is today. And although and there are a number of different manifestations of Pan-Africanism. This is sustainable tourism, which is basically a Pan-Africanist conference designed to bring Europeans and outsiders into Africa, but to spend money in areas that are constructive, in areas that are productive. For example, when we went to Senegal, we visited a center called le Centre des Guérisseurs Traditionnels. That was where Dee, had some applications. This is the Center for Traditional Healers. And so, we visited that center. We visited an AIDS development clinic, AIDS prevention clinic. We visited the Sheikh Anta Diop University. So we didn't just go and watch people dance, although we did that. We had fun. I had lots of fun. But we visited, actually, Sheikh Anta Diop University twice. We visited a place called the Institut Fondamental de l'Afrique Noire. We went to we also went to the Gambia and visited a gentleman who was in the process of restoring a slave site in the Gambia River. So we didn't just go and do the usual tourist thing. So this is what this is about: sustainable tourism. Tourism that really significantly contributes to the country. This is the Africa Cup of Nations, which was recently held in Johannesburg. Anybody here from Nigeria? Nobody here from Nigeria? Oh my goodness. Anybody? Go Nigeria, because guess who won this Africa Cup? And here's the coach. So, this is it, huh?
He resigned.
He resigned?
Yeah.
I don't know what that was about. I don't know what that was about. But anyway, so here's, so there are all kinds of, today, manifestations of Pan-Africanism. I could go on, we don't have time. But there are all kinds of manifestations of Pan-Africanism in the continent today. Musically, there's a lot of exchange. One of the majors, I guess you could say, and maybe Professor Gnaka is going to correct me here, but Zaire, or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and South Africa are two of the major producers of music. It goes on. I mean, there's actually a television station in South Africa that broadcasts over the continent, outside of South Africa. They produce a lot of programming for African television. But this guy's name is George Collinet. I think he's from the Caribbean. But there are a lot of people. Afroprop, you can hear streaming music on this site. And here's another site, Afroprop Worldwide. But also, I wanted to take you to about 3 sites, just real quickly. And you can go back and visit these sites. Oh no, it's got a problem. You can visit these sites later at your leisure. In New York City, there's a library in Harlem. Now, the library itself is a branch of the New York City Public Library. It's the oldest, really, center and the largest center of black studies in the United States. And it is located on Malcolm X Boulevard, which used to be called Lenox Avenue, for those of you who are old New Yorkers. But it's right in the heart of Harlem. And it has all kinds of exhibitions and collections, art collections, manuscript collections, digital and video collections for researchers, and they put on a lot of public programming. So the Schomburg Center, as I said, is a branch of the New York City Public Library and the major center for black studies in the United States. So I encourage you to visit their website to find out more about them. Another center is actually out on the West Coast and is basically put together by a friend of mine at the University of Washington in Seattle, Dr. Quintard Taylor. This is Dr. Taylor's in the upper right-hand corner, and this is an extremely rich site that you can use to do research in black studies. They have, now these films, there are a few video clips, they're not full-length digital, but there are a few digital clips, but there's a very good filmography here that will tell you a lot about documentary films and where you can locate these films. These are all lists of films. And then there's all kinds of articles, and I'm going to engage in self-promotion here because I have 3 articles on that I've written, so it's not an accident to the site, okay? What can I say? Moving on. Now the last site is the African Union, and here again, I'm not going to burden time, but this really, there is no major region of the world that has the level of regional unity, except for Western Europe, that Africa does. Now, true, the Europeans have a bank, they have a monetary system, they have a currency, but they have no military organization whatsoever. They have never been able to put together a military peacekeeping force, ever. The issues that came in the former Yugoslavia were basically put down by NATO, which was an American-led organization. And so there was no European organization that kept the peace in Yugoslavia. The Africans have an international army. It's true they don't do what they could. These are small countries, these are developing countries. There's a lot of facts about colonialism, but this is in 4 languages, and this is the largest website here. And if we have time, I'll talk more about how a lot of the problems of Africa, the AU has been excluded. systematically and deliberately excluded from trying to solve regional problems in Africa. One example was Muammar Gaddafi, and they offered to negotiate an end to his regime. They offered to negotiate a peaceful end to Gaddafi's regime. They were rejected. When this issue in Mali came up with Al-Qaeda, they offered to, again, help. It was the French who went in. Now, the French have said that they're going to turn the peacekeeping forces over to the AU. We'll see what happens. But the AU has an army. They've helped to keep the peace in Somalia. They've been very effective. I've talked to several. I talked to an Australian guy who just got back from Somalia, and he says they've been very effective in Somalia. They've been in the South Sudan. There's a group called ECOWAS or ECOMOG in Sierra Leone that has helped keep the peace. And so the African Union is moving forward despite a lot of handicaps. And despite, I have to say to you, despite some of the undermining by the Europeans, even today. You'll see here, there's a whole set of things here, and they just had a summit. Their major headquarters are in Addis Ababa. They have a beautiful building. Unfortunately, it was built by the Chinese. But it's still a beautiful building. And they just had a summit in Addis this past month. And so you can go here to find out more about it. You see, Pan-Africanism is not dead by any means. It is an idea that is alive and well, and it has a future. So that's basically all I have to say, and I'll turn the floor over to my colleague.
Okay. So while I try to locate my presentation, I'd like to thank you. And this is my second semester here at Montgomery College, and I'm teaching African history. Thanks to Dr. Alonzo Smith, who is, I will say, my mentor here at Montgomery College. And when I had a conversation with him, I was surprised that he told me that he lived in Bayako. That's the very place where I went to elementary school. That's how God has different ways. God has strong ways of connecting people. So I was surprised.
Before you were born.
But it's something like that, right? Yeah. Okay, before I was born, or that he left the place when I was the year I think I came to life. But afterwards, I went to elementary school there, and it's where I was. That's the place of my childhood, and I have great memories, of that place. And Dr. Alonzo Smith was there, and then years later, decades later, I found myself here, and he's the one mentoring me here at Montgomery College. So he told me that. He wanted us to put together a conference on Pan-Africanism, and I was, what is this? Oh yes, yes, okay. I was, glad, that he proposed that, because my research, when I did my PhD at Harvard University, it was about Pan-Africanism. I tried to propose, a theory of Pan-African development. And I tried to propose something to advance the cause of Pan-Africanism in the field of political economy. And my friend George is here. Since 2007, we launched a public forum. We call it the Revival of Pan-Africanism Forum. So like last year, we organized on October the 20th, our 12th conference. It was on the life and legacy of Thomas Sankara, who was the president of Burkina Faso. So today, as Dr. Alonzo has introduced the topic, so where is this? Okay.
Excuse me, before you go in, would you kindly do us a favor of reintroducing yourself and tell us what country you're from, because a lot of people.
Okay, I'm from Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast is in West Africa. It's not far from Senegal, where you went to, right? And so it's a French-speaking country. We were colonized, by the French, and then Ivory Coast became independent in 1960. And the first president of Ivory Coast, Félix Houphouët-Boigny, I may not talk about him too much today, but Félix Houphouët-Boigny created a political party called the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain in 1946, 2 years after he put together an African Farmers Union. But even though his political party was represented in different territories within the French Africa, West Africa, the French West Africa, which was a federation controlled by French, because they created two federations during colonial time and to control the colonies. So that party was represented in Guinea, in Mali, and all different places. And but Houphouët-Boigny did not advocate the Pan-African vision the same way Kwame Nkrumah did. So when you talk about Nkrumah and Houphouët, you will see like the differences between those two individuals. But before, as we find the presentation, Pan-Africanism. What is Pan-Africanism? Pan-Africanism, it is about an idea of oneness and unity and solidarity between Africans and people of African descent. It is also about the political and economic integration of Africa. And then Dr. Smith, show you quickly 3 things I wanted to say as we talk about the pioneers of the Pan-African movement. He spoke about Blyden Sylvester William, who was the first to coin the word Pan-Africanism in 1900, and W.B. Du Bois, who organized the 5 congresses within the Pan-African movement, and coined the word Pan-Negroism, I think in 1898, even before Sylvester Williams spoke about Pan-Africanism in 1900. We saw the picture of Marcus Garvey, and we organized, I think, 3 major conventions in the 20s, and like I said later on, it was destroyed by the American federal system. Now, after Du Bois, there was Kwame Nkrumah, who became the Prime Minister of Ghana and the President of Ghana in 1957, and who took the Pan-African movement from the Americas, to Africa in 1957. And later on, in 1958, Kwame Nkrumah was going to organize the All-African People's Conference in 1958. So Nkrumah then was going to advocate, the organization, the development of Africa around the Pan-African ideal. So he wrote a book, Africa Must Unite. He wrote several books. Africa Must Unite is one book in which he explained clearly why Pan-Africanism is a matter of survival for the continent of Africa. Now, what Nkrumah said years ago, it is still up to date. When we talk about what Nkrumah said yesterday, today it is still relevant, it is still valid. Now, what I will say is that in my research, what I try to talk about a new dispensation of Pan-Africanism. Nkrumah was talking about Pan-Africanism from the socialist perspective. Du Bois spoke about Pan-Africanism from the socialistic perspective. And there were some critics or scholars who said that Garvey was talking about Pan-Africanism from the capitalistic perspective. But people who spoke about Pan-Africanism in the 40s and in the 50s and in the 60s, we can say today in the 21st century that they failed to embrace an African philosophical system, because we have our philosophies as Africans. You could go to Senegal, they will talk about Teranga. If you go to South Africa, they will talk about Ubuntu. If you go to Africa, we have some African cultural value system that they put aside and to embrace ideologies that came from the West, be from Eastern Europe or be from Western Europe. So socialism and capitalism. So that was one major thing they did, and I think that in the 50 years after the independence of Africa, when we see how those two systems have been implemented on the continent of Africa today, I think that it is possible for us to think about a new dispensation by advocating a grand theory that can come from Africa. And then there are different. Julius Nyerere from Tanzania tried to talk about Ujamaa. But his mistake was that it has a flavor of socialism. And then, but there is a new system that is coming from South Africa that many scholars are using, that I have used in order to try and articulate a new dispensation of Pan-Africanism. We call that Ubuntu. What is Ubuntu? Ubuntu is about sharing. It is about collective. It's about sharing. It's about solidarity. It's about compassion. There is one major maxim of Ubuntu, which is that a man is a man through other men. So it means that my individual achievement in the community can only have a meaning and a significance if my people can see that they're also beneficiaries of my individual achievement. So it is about unity. It is about individual and then collective empowerment in the community. So there are many words, many articles, many books on Ubuntu. This is what we're using to tell Africans that we have to walk away a little bit from those Western ideologies that did not foster and that did not help true development on the continent of Africa. Why? Today, what we know that Africa represents less than 2% of world economy. The whole continent of Africa, 1 billion people, less than 2% of world economy. Home to plagues, poverty, poor leadership. There are at least 200 million people in Africa who are chronically hungry on the continent of Africa. 50 years after the independence of Africa. So people have tried various schemes of development. So we believe that the theories about promoting an African domestic market, the theories which are about collective empowerment, the theories which are about Africa has to look inward instead of looking outward, and also theories have been developed within a great a doctrine that we call Pan-Africanism. That's why, like Dr. Alonzo said, it is still alive, and there are some people who are working on that framework. Quickly, what we need to know about Pan-Africanism. 1776, here when they did the Declaration of Independence, white people forgot, to take into account the plight and the suffering of slaves here. And this is how those slaves were trying to connect themselves with the region they came from, Africa. And this is how the idea of oneness between people of African descent and Africa was forged. In Europe, there was an idea of unity. Hitler tried to promote to rule the world, but by bringing together Europe under his control. But even the idea of economic integration is part of human history. We don't have time to talk about other things today. But Pan-Africanism is the African articulation of the idea of unity, and it is the African work towards a greater integration and African response to world issues. Now, when you talk about Pan-Africanism, let's talk about the anatomy of Pan-Africanism. It's about a discourse of unity, and it's also about the implementation of a programmatic agenda. And Nkrumah tried it. Du Bois wrote about it. Marcus Garvey tried to implement it, and there are various groups today who are trying to promote, the Pan-African agenda. And it is about justice, it's about unity, it's about equality, and it's about complementarity. I'm going to pass that. But one thing I wanted to say quickly: why today we are so encouraged when you talk about Pan-Africanism. The rise to power of Barack Obama, even though Obama did not implement an agenda to empower Africa beyond, his speeches, that did not do too much, for the continent of Africa, and beyond the fact that under Obama, there are two African countries were bombed: Libya and then Ivory Coast, when there was the political electoral stalemate over there. But Obama, his father is from Kenya, and his mother is white. His father is from Kenya, and his wife is African American. So Malcolm X and Dr. King, and W.B. Du Bois, all those great Pan-Africanists, they were talking about that link, that bond that should be reinforced between Africans and people of African descent. They have written and they have spoken. But with Obama's marriage as a son of Africa or son of Kenya, and then part of the African American community, married to an African American lady, I can tell you that the Eritrean who are fighting with the Ethiopian, they found themselves like in Obama. The Igbo and the Yoruba fighting in Nigeria, they found themselves in Obama. The African American who lost hope in their own redemption, they found that they can dream about that connection with Africa. So Obama, many scholars do not speak about that yet, but it's a powerful symbol that gave like a fool to the Pan-African ideal and to the Pan-African vision just by being Obama and become the first black president and married to an African American lady. But 20 years before him, Nelson Mandela, after 300 years of white domination in South Africa, black people could have access to political power. Mandela became the first black president in South Africa, and then since then, black people are ruling that nation, which is the powerhouse in Africa. So there are powerful symbols like that, but people do not connect them. And then one of the symbols is the World Cup that was organized in 2010. And I thought Alonzo was going to speak about that. The World Cup, it was the first time. And that World Cup was organized in Africa, and then God has ways of working. All the African countries were eliminated, and the only country that went to the quarterfinal was Ghana, Nkrumah's country. And all African people were connected, they were supporting Ghana so that Ghana could go a little bit farther. So these two, right, gave an impetus to the Pan-African idea among Africans and people of African descent. Now, but we talk about the social economy, but that's a little bit long. I will move quickly. And okay. Now, when we talk about Pan-Africanism in world history, we need to know that it is about freedom. It's about freedom. Freedom against slavery. Freedom against colonialism. Freedom against apartheid. Freedom against neocolonialism. Freedom against a neoliberal economic system. And freedom against globalization and corporate exploitation. This is Pan-Africanism in world history. Pioneers, we spoke about them quickly. But I will mention Dr. King. Sometimes when people talk about Pan-African pioneers, they forget Dr. King. He went to Ghana when Nkrumah was sworn in. He was there. There were many black Americans and some white people were there in 1957. And he wrote, he delivered a sermon. If you go online, you can find out. The title is The Birth of a New Nation, 1957. In that speech or that sermon, Dr. King, in 1957, was already advocating Pan-African values and Pan-African ideas. And in that speech and sermon, he spoke about how important the positive action used by Kwame Nkrumah, or how Kwame Nkrumah struggled, or Ghana's struggle, Ghana's independence, was very important for the civil rights movement here in America. So you can go, you can check that. Now, today, we have African Renaissance as a new variant of the Pan-African movement, promoted by Thabo Mbeki, by South Africans. And we heard about the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, which was a continental plan put together by African leaders in 2002, 1 year after the creation of the African Union, from the Organization of African Unity to African Union 2001. But what we need to know is that 10 years after the new Partnership for Africa's Development, nothing, we did not see too much change. But we see Mbeki is gone, but we don't see that NEPAD being espoused by civil society in Africa, and we don't see the mobilizations of the African masses around that continental plan. And there are many critics who said that NEPAD was embedded in the neoliberal policies, the very policies that maintain Africa in a state of dependency and a state of underdevelopment. So that's why when we come today, we need to come and, when we have time, we can talk about Nepal history and Nepal objectives. But today, it is important for us to come with a novel articulation needed for a common purpose on the continent of Africa, and then so that that novel articulation can help build an African collective consciousness, and so that we can educate the global African community, so that we can work for the alleviation of poverty, and so that we can promote sustainable development, and then so that we can promote development as a freedom, and so that we can help create a global African economic community. Now, one thing, yes, this is one thing I will say, and then I will stop. The Pan-Africanism is not a static construct. It's not static. And it revolves throughout history. So, in the 18th century, it was the struggle against slavery. Later on, the struggle against colonialism. Afterward, the struggle against apartheid. And today, the struggle against neoliberal policies. So, it has always been a response to specific historical conditions and challenges facing Africa and its people. So, in light of current challenges, the author has identified new tenets of a new dispensation of Pan-Africanism. So, the new tenets are, I mentioned the Ubuntu, which is about the cultural and linguistic unity of Africa. We distance ourselves from capitalism and socialism. It is about the struggle against neocolonialism. It is about working for poverty alleviation on the continent of Africa. And it is about struggling for the cancellation of the African debt. And it's also about mobilizing the African masses and the African people against corporate exploitation, and then the struggle, to advance corporate social responsibility. And it is also about spiritual unity. I will talk about that. That will be the last thing I will say. And it's also about individual and collective freedom. And it is about mobilization against that humanitarian crusade in which Africans were bombed in Libya and in Ivory Coast. So Frantz Fanon said that if we live, we need to think about a new life. We must work out new concepts, and we must try to set afoot a new man. Now, that was about Ubuntu. We can see that in Shangan, they call that Numuhu, Benda Ubuntu, in Tsonga Ubuntu, Sosa Ubuntu. So the same, that linguistic sound, you can see that in different people who are connected with the Bantu expansion. Okay. That's Nkrumah. This is what I call the wheel of imperialism. Why it is so important for us to think about Pan-Africanism, to think about unity. When since the 15th century, this is what we see, that they have created different institutions, and they're using those institutions to control the world. So when we have that wheel of imperialism, there is no way as a single country, or there is no way as Lesotho, you can compete with America, working together with the 27 countries of the European Union. That's not possible. So it's a matter of survival for us to think about Pan-Africanism. So, where I am now. Okay, no, I'm not going to talk about that quickly. Another time. Okay, so this is what I will say. And then the vision that we're promoting rests upon 8 pillars: philosophical, spiritual, educational, cultural. So we will attempt to talk about that. But the most important thing is that Pythagoras said that unity is the law of God. And white people understood that. Europeans, they understand that. They did the 2 world wars. They did whatever they could do, and they came to a point that they understand that everything they have to do, it has to revolve around unity. And then that's why they do everything possible to maintain African countries in a spirit, in a state of a perpetual division. Because when people come together, as Pythagoras said it, unity is the law of God. So if we come together consciously as people, we will know that we are tapping in the highest energy, which is the energy of God. That's why the vision I'm promoting, I talk about that spiritual dimension of Pan-Africanism in the 21st century. Many people did not want to touch that aspect in the way they were theorizing that Pan-African concept. So thank you very much, and then when I have questions, I may come back to some of the slides. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Someone? Come on. Someone has to have a question.
You said you're going to have a question. I have a question. How you doing? That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. One of the things you said stood out for me as a project I'm working on. Would you mind repeating that again? It was a quote you just said, a man is a man.
Yes, the Ubuntu maxim, the man is a man through other men. That's Ubuntu. So you will see that in different languages in Southern Africa, in South Africa, and also in different parts in Mozambique. You will see that. So that's the quote. And this is the essence of the African people. Even though our history was marked with wars, civil wars, but this is part of the African ways of seeing things. And then we live like that, right? We live like that in Africa. That's why people can go to Africa, and then they can come from Japan. They can be white Americans, white Europeans, but they will always find somebody who is going to shelter, who is going to open, the house, because we believe in those values of solidarity. But unfortunately, because our elite was corrupted, by those values coming from other parts of the world, that we believe in individualism, then of course, people tend to think that, most of the people in Africa, they don't still live by, that Ubuntu maxim, which is a man through other men. This maxim is opposed to Descartes, a French Descartes, a philosopher who said that I think, therefore I am. So you see, so that's the position. This is what we're doing. We want people to understand that by doing something in the community, by doing the right thing. I'm not just saying that the way of living is only African. I'm not saying that. Right? We can see that in Europe. We can even see that here in America. Right? Even though people want to think that the American dream is about individual achievement, but we can see that throughout America that there are people who want to do things in order for other people, because of what they want to leave as legacy. Yes, madam.
I wonder if that could be rephrased as a person is a person through other persons. The reason I say that is I had the privilege of listening to Kumla Gobora Marika, who worked on the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She's the psychologist, and she told us about a concept called Inimba, where Inimba is like the umbilical cord, and that Ubuntu has to do with the connection that is as intimate as the mother to the child. So I wonder if you could speak about women in this Pan-Africanism concept. Okay,
thank you very much. And I like, I put the man, when I said the man is a man through other men, that was the great M, right? Because in that Ubuntu, when they say Muntu, it's about men, great M, right? Male and female. Right. But I like what you said. It's a person through other person. Right. Now, in that Pan-African vision that we are promoting, of course, it is about women's right, right? It's about women's right, and it is about how women can play a major role as they are the one in charge of the agricultural sector in Africa. So I did not talk about that because I didn't have time to go through the whole presentation. But somewhere what did I do? Somewhere I spoke about women, even disabled people in Africa. Yes. It's part of the vision. I did not say that, but it's a comprehensive vision. It's not that what I'm doing is not that I am inventing anything, no. But there were missing links. And that is why we try to bring to that new dispensation. But what Nkrumah, W.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey, everything they did, I tried to summarize that. And the thing, they could not think about, like decades ago, is what we're trying to bring. So, of course, women have to play a major role in that vision. Let me see if I can find something. I think I put this somewhere. And if I see that, I will show that to you. So that will be my answer to your question. So women will play a very important role. Okay. Anyway, I don't see Anyway, so that would be my question, my answer. Yes, madam. So, yeah, doctors.
No, there's a gentleman.
Yeah, Dwayne.
Where's the major holdup in the unification of Africa? Is it coming from Europe or is it coming from Africa itself?
Oh, yes. That's okay. Like because we don't have enough time, sure. But it is there. One thing when we talk about the unification of Africa, people think that we want to unify the 54 countries in Africa. I don't think I can even. If I think like that, it means that I'm not normal. Right? There is no continent on the face of Earth that is unified. No continent. In North America, we have what? Canada, and we have the United States of America. Right. But at least what we want to see a greater entities, a greater number of African countries coming together. Right? This is what we want to see. Now, in Europe, when they started in the beginning, there were only three states. Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, like 50 years ago. And then gradually today, the European Union is composed of 27 countries. In America, we've heard about the 13 colonies. And today, America is composed of what? 50 states. Cheikh Anta Diop, in his book, Black Africa, has suggested that that process start in West Africa. And I agree with him, even though, in fact, that South Africa could be the leading nation. So, based on the realistic theory, we believe that it's upon a few states in Africa, in order to start that process. So it can be South Africa, because South Africa is a powerhouse. It can be Ivory Coast, because in Ivory Coast, my country, if you take like 3 families, at least in one family, you will see somebody coming from an indigenous traditional ethnic group in Africa, and then from Ivory Coast, and somebody coming from another region. It's a land where you can see like people from different parts of the world. So it is there already, that future we want to see in Africa, with blacks and whites and Asians living together. You can see that in South Africa. That's what they call the nation, the Rainbow Nation, and then also in Ivory Coast. So those 2 states and other states, they can start the process. So it has to start in Africa, within Africa, by African states, and we don't have to wait for all the 20 countries to come together. It can be 2 or 3 coming together, and then Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso can come one state. If the 2 leaders want, they can do that overnight. Dr. Alonzo.
Well, in the West, because we're teaching this course in human rights, a great part of the conversation has to do with individual freedom. So how can we talk about human rights in Africa without getting into this extreme emphasis on individualism and individual freedom? What other kinds of ways are there looking at human rights besides individualism?
I don't know if I understand your question.
Well, the question is that in the West, in Europe and North America, there's an excessive emphasis on individualism, often not only at the expense of the community, but even at the expense of the family. I mean, husband and wife, they want to do their own thing. Children want to do their own thing. Everyone wants personal self-gratification. So what can Africa offer in terms of defining what is human and what is good and what is a human right? What is an African view of human rights? Okay,
I think I have an idea, and I don't know if I will be able to to answer the question maybe the way you want. But it is true that in the 21st century we want Africans, and this is maybe we're not going to embrace freedom the way freedom is understood in the Western world, right? But at the same time, we should also create an environment in which we should respect and promote individual freedoms on the continent of Africa. I'm not even going to talk about the state. I'm going to talk about family. I'm going to talk about in the political arena. I can just talk about myself when I was younger and I was trying to say things in the political arena. and in the African psyche, they cannot understand that you are maybe young, and then after the elders have spoken, then you're going to come and contradict them. So you can see many politicians talk about freedom in Africa, and they still have that mentality. And then, of course, my personal history will push me in order to advocate, the promotion of individual freedom in Africa, so that people can unlock the individual potential, because that is very important. And the way I did not mention that, but the way we understand the Pan-African vision in the 21st century, the reason why African countries are suffering, it is because the leaders or the masses haven't understood the importance of unlocking, like, the individual freedom of the African people. But like you said, not at the expenses of the needs of the community. This is what that's the balance we're trying to find. Because if people understand that I can feed myself, right? And people did that here in America. In some parts, during when you go to African history and stuff. If people understand that, you don't have to wait for the state, or you don't have to wait for the food to come from America. As an individual, then if you want, to respect your own freedom, you have the freedom to go and grow food. You can feed yourself. If people understand that, we're going to have a major number of people who are going to take that, that freedom of doing things in order to unlock, their individual potential, to advance the cause of the community. So this is how I see it. I don't know if you talk about the human rights in the. If you want, you can, maybe if I miss it, you can, you can say something. Okay. Yes.
Yes. I want to pick on what you said and add it to kind of try to give an answer, a little bit of an answer to Alonzo in his use of freedom. Because freedom is relative. Yeah. People's food are cooked by people's firewood. The food I cook in Nigeria might not be cooked in a microwave. So, having said that, when you talk of communalism in African context, it's not supposed always to be a restriction. Yep. It's not a constrictor. Yep. It's an enabler. Yep. And we always have that idea that, like you said, in Ubuntu and human beings, that he who has human beings is richer than somebody who is wealthy. In the sense that if you bury yourself, one of your hands will hang out of the grave. You need somebody to bury you. And in order to do that, because you know that no matter the amount of money you have, money cannot bury you. Somebody has to arrange people that will bury you. So, what do? You make sure that you are in sync with the community. Not community at large. It could be your family as a community. It could be, because if you just step out, for instance, you're getting married, and everybody says, no, it's not going to be good, and all that, and you go out of it and say, I must do it in spite of the family. It might turn out well, in which case everybody will rejoice with you. But when it doesn't turn out well, what do? You don't have the social system here to fall back on. Who do you fall back on? The family. That's why I'm saying, examining that issue of freedom, because like when I talk to my students in class about freedom, yes, America advocates freedom. But you're free to flunk if you don't do your job, right? So it's freedom. So when you know that the person is going to fail, and you enable the person not to fail by taking away the fear of the freedom, saying you have to do your work, then you haven't killed that person. You have helped the person to achieve.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all for this panel. My name is Brian McClure. I'm a doctoral student from the University of Memphis. And my question is in regards to education. Can you kind of talk about the role historically black colleges played, preferably before the turn of the 20th century, maybe a few years after, in developing Pan-African ideology?
So, Dr. Smith.
Well, as a Howard graduate, someone who received his master's in African history from Howard, in fact, I think almost like the first courses in African studies were offered at historically black colleges. back in the early 1900s, Du Bois taught at Atlanta University, and he began to develop courses on the black experience. In addition to that, the spirituals, this is our sacred music. Now, originally they were sung by lay people who just kind of improvised and got together. But after the Civil War, they were written down with musical notation. The very first places that those spirituals were preserved and written down were at historically black colleges in the 1870s and 1880s. And they were the students and the faculty who performed these. The most well-known was at Fisk University in Nashville. They were called the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And they toured not only over the United States, they toured in Europe. You can go to their website. They have a whole history. So it was at Fisk and at Howard and Atlanta that African culture and African-American culture was really first collected and preserved. And many of the early Pan-African scholars were people who who either taught or who had completed academic programs at historically black colleges. In that connection, I'm going to put some flyers up. Dr. Suleiman Yang, who was a very distinguished African scholar and an authority on African Muslims, is going to be speaking at the Martin Luther King Center next week. So there's a flyer. I'll put that up for you.
Okay. As we talk about education. Of course, he has more knowledge than myself on that topic. But one thing I want us to understand is that I took my first Pan-Africanism class in 2002 at Howard University. So in my country, because the first president was working, to serve the interests of the French, as he was trying to lead the country for 33 years. We don't have any political science department in Ivory Coast. And I think even up to now, for at least 50 good years. So you can imagine the generations of Africans that who go to school and who do not have the proper training and education for them to be to embody the African personhood that is needed for the Pan-African ideology we're trying to promote. So I think that that's why we believe that Pan-Africanism should be taught. Wherever Africans and people of African descent are, Pan-Africanism should be taught. The same way in America here, they teach many things about the American history, American civilization, the American political thoughts. This is how people should teach Africans and people of African descent, about Pan-Africanism. See, if you do that, then you will understand slavery. You will understand neocolonialism. You will understand apartheid. You will understand the policies that are formulated at the World Bank, at the IMF, and you will understand why those policies promoted by Europeans, embraced by African leaders, why they're not working. You will understand why they're not working. No. If you understand what is Pan-Africanism. And Dr. Alonzo spoke about there are different ways, different forms of Pan-Africanism. We can talk about the Harlem Renaissance. We can talk about negritude with Mrs. Leopold Sédar Senghor. So all the things are part of the cultural dimension of Pan-Africanism. So it's a field of research that is very, very, very interesting. You can have development there, you can have political economy there, you can have anthropology there, you can have history there. So, all the things, are part of the Pan-African scholarship. And then by doing those conferences, we are trying to make people understand that for us, in order to do something different from what people have been doing for decades in Africa, when we embrace the Pan-African vision, and when we have the right scholarship within the Pan-African vision, then we may come with some framework different from what the consensus of Washington is proposing to Africa. Yes, madam.
Can you speak about the role foreign loans and captured flight has played in the underdevelopment of Africa?
Well, usually when I speak, because there are things that are so obvious, right? So, I usually, I skip because we know how, there's the transnational corporations in Africa, and that have been operating in Africa, for let's say since the colonial time, even before the colonial time. Then of course, there is a system whereby most of the money, they get in exploiting Africa, they take it, to the Western banks and to the Western world. So when we look and we're looking for money for us, to develop Africa, the money is there, right? But it is in the hands of people who do not have the interests of Africa at heart. That's why in the new dispensation, we're promoting, we are talking about the corporate social responsibility, which is about a new way of, like a new understanding of citizenship in Africa by individuals and by entities on the soil of Africa, and also, by those corporations. Now, this is one of the things, we're serious about. Okay. Your turn?
Yeah.
Okay,
Just one last comment.
Okay.
Just to wrap this up. Booker T. Washington, who was, one of our African-American leaders, was very controversial because of some of the things he said about civil rights, or even some of the things he failed to say about civil rights. But he hit the nail on the head when he talked about self-help. And when he said, don't always necessarily think about, looking to the state or looking to the government to help you or looking to people to enforce your rights. Coming together, whether it's in terms of spiritual development, whether it's in terms of economic development. We're told that there are a lot of differences between us. Look physically or culturally, but a lot of this is a conscious, cultural kind of thing. And you're unified if you think you are, and you're disunified if you think you're not. So can I just leave it with that? Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much.
If anybody want any information about what's on the table, you have time,
Yeah.
then I can